5 years ago, the answer to this question was much simpler. The situation has changed a lot in 2022. Hey guys, today I'm going to answer the question whether you should buy NAS, network attached storage, or try to make one using maybe Raspberry Pi or all the components. Five years ago I've built my first NAS. Back in then I didn't have that much money, so a perspective of actually making a NAS box for less than £50 was actually very appealing to me. I couldn't really afford the NAS enclosures I wanted, and even though my first NAS enclosure was a little bit limited because back in then I was using RaspberryPi4 limited to 100 megs Ethernet connection, I was perfectly happy for my use case. I just wanted to have a NAS storage that I can access from outside without powering my main computer, maybe store a couple of files and stream some Plex films. And that was pretty much all I ever wanted from that box. And to get similar features on consumer grade hardware, well, you were expected to spend quite a bit of money back then. Money, by the way, I didn't have. It is 2022 and the landscape has changed significantly. On one side we do have a Raspberry Pi 4 which removed the biggest bottleneck from the Raspberry Pi series boards, meaning the Ethernet connection. Now it's full gigabit connection that you can take advantage of. Increased popularity of Raspberry Pi have also given us a choice, because now you don't really have to make an enclosure, you can select something from existing options. For example, like the Argon Ion I've got in here. But that also led to, during the pandemic, to shortages on production components and increased the price of Raspberry Pi 4 boards quite significantly. On the other side, however, the consumer market never been so strong. The NAS boxes are much less expensive, the features are plentiful, and everything is so much easier and accessible to use. Even I was quite surprised to look at Synology OS to find out that everything pretty much works out of the box. I'm going to split this video in several categories, and we're going to be examining both sides, comparing pros and cons to hopefully come with a great suggestion. Let's start with the most important factor, which is obviously upfront cost. If you're going to pick a off-the-shelf solution, an average box like this, in this case DS418, will cost you around £330 to £350 depending on where you're shopping. Additionally, you'll have to pay for the storage, and in my test I simply bought a £500 worth of storage, divided it by half, and I was running the same configuration of both devices together, so none of them would have a preferential treatment, which means in that case my storage for consumer grade hardware was in a ballpark of £250. So that will bring the total figure to £550 to £580 for a ready Synology drive for you to use with a couple of nice terabytes there. So how much are we going to pay for DIY approach in 2022? Well, this is where things get a little bit complicated. If you're lucky enough to have the Raspberry Pi 4 in your drawer, then obviously that cost is going to be removed from the total tally. But if you're shopping for the new board, then there are some obstacles to overcome. In my box I'm using the 8 gig version of Raspberry Pi 4, something that usually costs £75 if you can get your hands on it, but more often than not it's more expensive. I've even seen the price of this board skyrocketing to nearly £200. Now, availability aside, that will increase the budget for this build significantly. Now, if you already have a Raspberry Pi 4 in your drawer, then you're in luck and you can save yourself a bit of money. Next up is the enclosure, and if you want to have something nice like Argon Ion, then you'll have to be prepared to spend additional £140 to £150. I could get away with making my own enclosure, but if you want things to look nice and professional, then, well, you'll have to rely on opening your wallet a little bit more. Lastly, it's the storage, and in my case, it's that 250 I've spent for one SSD of 2 terabytes and one 3.inch hard drive with 6 terabytes. That all will add up, and the total cost will range from 500 to 600 pounds depending on how much you're going to pay for your Raspberry Pi. You can see already that you're not going to make significant savings. It's nowhere near the savings I've made 5 years ago by using Raspberry Pi. Another thing that you should be really mindful and add to your available budget is how much time you're willing to spend on it, because time is money, and my time is definitely valuable. And I look at the projects and I actually value how much time I'm going to spend on something, because sometimes it's generally a better idea to, throw money at it. For now, let's put the time aside and focus on hardware, as we have our hardware configuration set for both scenarios. So on one hand, I have a Synology DS418 with the following parameters. As a 4-core, 64-bit, 1.4 GHz processor inside the unit with 2 gigs of DDR4 RAM available for that processor. And while the box will probably work on a gigabit connector, you have an option for the second LAN connector in case you want to aggregate that and increase the speed of a transfer to 2 gigs if your infrastructure supports it. Additionally, 4 bays allow you to either slot in 4 3.5-inch mechanical drives or 4 equivalent of the 2.5 whether they're mechanical and SSD drives for the total storage of 64 terabytes. And lastly, you have also 2 USB 3.2 ports that you can take advantage of when it comes to data transfer and extracting data from the drive. Useful indeed. Inside my Argon case, however, I have a Raspberry Pi 4, and on paper it's slightly faster. It comes with quad-core processor as well. We have 1.5 GHz processor, it's 64 bits as well, but you also have ability to run it a little bit faster if you want to overclock it. I've seen overclocks of 2.0, so if you want to go fast, the option is there. Just make sure the cooling is adequate. On the same board we also have 8 gigs of RAM because I've picked the maximum configuration for this build, and we have a Wi-Fi 2.5 and 5 gig version and also 1 gigabit Ethernet, which is something that we're going to definitely use for that build. When it comes to storage space, we'll have to consider the limitation of Argon Ion. That enclosure allows you to have up to 4 drives inside, however only 2 of them can be mechanical 3.5-inch drives, so that is the limitation. Obviously you can pick other configuration including 4 2.5-inch drives, whether mechanical or SSDs, but that configuration, it's down to you. Another limitation is the maximum storage that the case allows you to actually utilize, which is 40 terabytes, which is slightly less than on the DS418. But we also have a quite rich I/O, which means that everything on the Raspberry Pi 4 is exposed, so we have extra USB ports, we have a HDMI and access to GPIO header. Something to be mindful, especially if you want to use that board for additional tasks. So looking at both configurations side by side, we can see that Raspberry Pi 4 hardware is slightly better. It allows for the CPU overclock and it has more RAM. However, there is one big bottleneck that we'll have to bear in mind, which is the fact that all the drives connected via Argon Ion are linked to the USB 3.0 hub inside the Raspberry Pi 3. That creates a bottleneck that will impede our access to data stored on our drives. On the other side, the Synology box might not have such a great hardware on paper, but it doesn't have the same bottleneck, and it comes with second LAN port which you can aggregate to the 2 gigabit connection. I mean, let's face it, majority of us actually have a gigabit connection at home, and yes, I'm fully aware of those 3 of you that have 10 gig connection at home, and so you can stop boasting just about now. Stop, please, now. But in practice and in day-to-day tasks, the average user, I don't think he will notice the difference. Surely I hadn't. But what speaks volumes for selecting Synology is the fact that you can add 50% more storage according to official support. Anyway, before we jump any further, there is one thing that everyone probably right now boiling inside and waiting to discuss. What if I'm going to use my retired laptop or some PC hardware and build my NAS box from scratch from old components without actually paying premium price for Raspberry Pi 4, etc. It is a very valid approach and it can save you a buck or two, but there is a couple of things that you should really consider. I already mentioned time as a consideration, which obviously gonna add even more of your time to get this project off the ground, but there is one more thing that you should think about. 2022 it's a year where everything gets expensive, including energy. On average, your laptop or old PC might draw anything between 50 to 100 watts easily, and if you're going to run this 24/7 with prices for electricity from October 2022, well, I've done the napkin math for you, and if you were to run a 50-watt box with your drives and everything made from old computer parts 24/7, so that's for 8,760 hours, in UK that will yield you a bill of £150 per year. That's a massive bill. Imagine how much storage you could actually buy in a cloud for that. So yes, repurposing old hardware might be a good idea, but not if you want to save your money on electricity. Now, to compare that with existing solutions from Synology, that draws anywhere between 8 watts in hibernation to 25 watts in direct use, so half as much as probably what you would spend energy-wise on something made from an old laptop. When it comes to Raspberry Pi, it is even more efficient because it runs around 20 watts when you actually draw the data and drops down to about 17 when the disks aren't being actively used, and even less if you run it in hibernation. I'm several minutes into this video and I don't have any favorites yet. Let's talk about looks. Now, when you're picking a disk station, what you get is a box with an easy access to all drives for hot swap or whatever you want to do with it. It's not really an impressive box and you probably want to shove it underneath the bed or wherever just to get it out of sight. But if you're picking Argon Ion, well, it's a different story. The box is actually attractive, looks like a nice showpiece, and I don't mind not hiding it, providing you'll manage the fan. Now, out of the box, Argon Ion is loud. It's very, very loud, but with a little bit tweaking and adjusting fan profile, you actually can get it to be as quiet as Synology disk station. So when it comes to looks, Argon Ion is definitely a winner here. For as long as you can forgive it that it can only hold two 3.5-inch hard drives, right? Alright, it's time to discuss operating systems, and we're going to start with Synology because it's going to be a much shorter topic. Now, from the box to actually having running with some services deployed, it honestly takes anywhere between 15 to 25 minutes, depending on the size of the drives you've selected. The process is super straightforward, involves a couple of clicks, and your network drive is ready to be accessed with plethora of different services available at your fingertip. If you want to install the Plex, all you have to do really is just click on the Plex, add your system user to a share so you could see the files, and you are ready. You don't have to do anything else or anything special. It's easy, intuitive, and it doesn't make you think twice. I wish I could say the same about Open Media Vault. Now, don't get me wrong. If you have the knowledge, if you know what you're doing, you've done that before, you know how to spin up containers, how to manage the volumes and everything, you're probably not going to spend as much time either. But you are watching this video, which means you're probably not exactly sure whether you're making a good choice, which means there are some obstacles that I probably should tell you. Now, the whole process of installing the Open Media Vault isn't particularly hard, and I'm sure you're gonna manage it. But expect to spend extra time to set everything up. It's not as straightforward, and it's not as intuitive as when doing so on Synology. Now, expect to spend extra time, expect to browse the internet looking for answers, and honestly, how quickly you're going to go through an entire setup process for the drives itself, from the Open Media Vault and additional services, it will depend only on your knowledge, skill, and ability to find and troubleshoot the issues. Plex installation is a great example of it. I know already how to set up the volumes and how to share them via Samba and make it accessible to my network. However, in this version of Open Media Vault, I had to install Docker to actually add Plex container. Now, if you've never used the Docker before, it's yet another thing that you'll have to get yourself familiar with and learn how to do things, how to map your volumes to container, how to allow access to that container via a network, etc., etc. I mean, I spent over an hour trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong and why I cannot see my Plex server online. So if you've never done that before, I won't blame you for not choosing this path and going with consumer-grade device. I'm gonna be absolutely honest with you guys. When I had to send back my disk station to Synology, I was crying inside because I knew I'll have to spend several hours with Open Media Vault to set it up just the same way I had my disk station set up within minutes. And yes, I probably spent about 4 to 6 hours in total to get all the problems resolved, find the useful guides and follow them to actually have all the services I want on my NAS storage. I know some of you will argue that the knowledge is priceless and I've learned something in the process, but there are aspects of what I've done to achieve this which are probably never gonna use it again unless this thing breaks again. So when it comes to operating system, I think Synology wins here because it's just simple to use and maintain, even though that Open Media Vault and having Linux installed on Raspberry Pi gives you greater flexibility. Next up is the performance, and there is a couple of things that I want you to keep in mind. First of all, the performance is gonna depend on your actual use. Personally, I've picked the DS418 and Argon Neon because they had a very similar price range and they offer 4 bays. Now how you're gonna utilize it is down to you, but when it comes to redundancy, you might find that 4 bays might not be enough because usually you'll have to sacrifice at least one drive to achieve that redundancy, which then in turn limits how much storage you're actually getting out of your box. And from hardware specification, you already know that a Raspberry Pi 4 will have that bottleneck introduced by connecting all 4 drives to a single USB port, but we will see how much that actually will impact my workflow. Let's start with local transfers, and by local transfers I mean the transfer from one disk inside the box to another. Now, when using Synology Drive, I had a pretty good experience maxing out the actually read and write limits on the mechanical drive, which means I was able to transfer the file, a 5 gig file, within less than 30 seconds across, maxing out at 175 megs per second. It proves the point that my physical drive was the limitation, not the actual box. Doing the same on Argon Neon, I hit that USB bottleneck. It was visible, however, it wasn't as great as I was anticipating. Now, I was able to ship the same file, 5 gigabytes, across from SSD to mechanical drive with less than a minute. So it was only a couple of seconds longer. But as much as you may complain about it, it's actually not going to be the biggest bottleneck that you experience on both systems. The biggest bottleneck is still Ethernet, because at 1 gigabyte per second, you're gonna be limited to that, not to the actual speed of your medium. Now, in both cases, whether I was using SSDs inside or mechanical drives, I was able to quickly saturate that Ethernet connection and cap myself at 100 to 110 megabytes per second. Now, the speed was slightly faster, 110 when I was using Synology, and slightly slower, about 105 megabytes per second using Argon Neon, and I think this is linked to the fact that Argon Neon was running multiple services with Open Media Vault and Linux running in the background. So I'm gonna contribute that drop in speed to that. So how's that translate to your day-to-day performance? Well, unless we're talking about redundancy, which is when you would take advantage of the internal speed of the box and transfer data from one drive to another, you're probably not going to even notice this. To prove this, I devised my own torture test to actually showcase you that it shouldn't really impact you either. So I was streaming a Plex media to one computer while editing Adobe Media Project with all the files located on my NAS drives. Whether I was using Synology Disk Station or Argon Neon with RaspberryPi4 inside, honestly I had a great experience and I didn't even notice any difference to working from a local computer. Yes, the project may be opened a second or two later, but honestly it's not something you'll ever feel unless you're running benchmarks. I think I've said enough, so it's time for conclusion. And conclusion, as usually, is gonna be, it depends. Now, if you're looking for something that you're going to be able to deploy quickly, you're not going to spend time maintaining a lot, and you don't have to exactly have a know-how to use it, Synology Disk Station is going to be a better choice. Right now it costs nearly the same as the Raspberry Pi based solution with Argon Eon, so you're not going to exactly save yourself any money and you're not doing yourself favors. And down the line you might be even more thankful because it supports up to 50% more storage, so if you plan your purchases wisely then you'll be able to upgrade your storage in the future. But if you have all the time in the world and all the skill, that you might go with Raspberry Pi 4 and Argon Eon. I mean, it's gonna look great and you'll be able to take advantage of the fact that it runs Raspbian OS and deploy other services than just NAS and selected packages from the Synology. Then it might be a good choice for you. And I honestly don't believe that mentioned bottleneck will impact you all that much. 5 years ago, my answer would be totally different. I would definitely give you a recommendation for Raspberry Pi, especially if that Ethernet bottleneck wasn't an issue. But now, I don't think it's so simple. The consumer boxes are flexible enough to satisfy most of us in terms of the services they provide and the ease of use. Looking at the prices of Raspberry Pi 4s, they actually might be even cheaper. So unless you've got Raspberry Pi 4 right now in your drawer, I think give online listings a go and check what are the prices of consumer grade NAS drives in your area. I'm gonna include a couple of links in the description of this video. Let me know what do you think and which option would you rather go. What are the most important features of a NAS drive, whether you would use it as a backup and redundancy solution, or would you rather use it as a network storage and server for random services? I'm very interested in that. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching and I hope this video helped you to clarify your mind about building a NAS in 2022. Let me know what you think and let me know what's important to you when it comes to NAS drives, whether you're more interested in redundancy and backup or whether you just want some network storage that you can expose and run a couple of server services on it. I'm very interested to hear that from you. As for now, I do not have a posting schedule, so if you want to know what next, well, you know how YouTube works. There's a couple of social media links provided as well, so follow me there and keep in touch. Thanks so much for watching and see you next time. Take care. Bye.